Week 8 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I looked at off the wire this week. The first one, the Miami Dolphins. I know the Dolphins had a few decent weeks in a row versus the Giants and Panthers, and then a bunch of teams dropped them in 44% of fantasy leagues with the matchup of Philly. But week 8 here, great matchup versus the Patriots that give up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So right now, this Dolphin unit versus bad teams, they've taken advantage. They get off to the quick start and then tee off and make plays defensively. And going back to week 2 at New England, 17 points allowed, 4 sacks, and into a fumble recovery. So right now, this Dolphin team available in 52% of fantasy leagues. They got a great matchup, and they feast on bad offenses this season. Next DSTs, the Los Angeles Chargers. So the Chargers, as a streaming option, have a good matchup this week here versus the Chicago Bears, where we know this Bear team's banged up. Looks like Justin Fields possibly won't play again, even though Tyson Beckett looked pretty decent. But this Bear team gives up the third most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I know this Charger team, they really haven't been all that great this season, especially that game at Kansas City. Mahomes went for over 400 yards in that one. But this week here versus a weak Chicago offensive line, and most likely playing with the backup quarterback in Biggett, I think this Charger team as a DST streaming option is a solid one. Available right now, 93% of fantasy leagues. The next DST is the Houston Texans. So the Texans available in 96% of fantasy leagues. But this Texan defense is playing well this season right now. And I know they're coming off the bye week, and they got a good matchup at the Panthers. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few games here for Houston, week 5 at Atlanta, 21 points allowed, 2 fumble recoveries. In week 6 versus New Orleans, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks, and into fumble recovery. So right now, this week available, like I said, in tons of leagues, in 94%. This Houston Texan DST, they got the good matchup at the Panthers that have trouble scoring the football. And we've seen Bryce Young this season make his mistakes. So right now, while they're out there in a bunch of leagues, and you could even pick them up right now since they're on bye without even putting a waiver claim in, I think they're a decent streaming option this week. The next DST is the Tennessee Titans. So another streaming option this week here is Tennessee, where they got a good matchup. And they're another team coming off a bye week where if you just want to pick up a defense now and not waste a waiver, or wait till Wednesday, Thursday, whenever your waivers are up, they got the good matchup versus the Falcons that give up the 6th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So right now, they're available in 98% of fantasy leagues. I know their defense isn't that great, but this Falcon offense isn't that great. I know Falcons are 4-2 on the season, but they're barely getting by winning these games. So right now, well, this Tennessee defense plays better at home, and it's a home game here versus Falcon offense. As a streaming option and a pickup this week in the 5th and final defense DST unit I look to get off the wire is the New York Giants. So the Giants, they shut down that Commander offense to only 7 points. And I know this Commander offense isn't an elite offense, but they still got decent weapons. Brian Robinson, Terry McLaurin, obviously. You got Jahan Dotson, even though he's having a bad season. But right now, they had a good ball game. In that one was the New York Giants. 7 points allowed, 6 sacks, an interception, a block kick versus Commander defense in Week 7 Life Stadium. And now you verse, obviously, New York rival, the New York Jets, which is pretty much a home game here for the Giants either way. So right now, it's going to be a game versus an offense that isn't all that great. Zach Wilson, I don't think really is that good. And they could go out there and they could get to Zach Wilson early and often. I know Breece Hall, he's a talented running back. Obviously, I also know that Garrett Wilson's one of the better wide receivers in the league. But like I said, I think this New York Giant DST, the last couple of weeks, they've been playing good football. Week 6, only giving up 14 points to Buffalo, and then a monster game versus the Commanders. So right now, available 97% of fantasy leagues. I would give this DST an ad this week, especially with the New York matchup and versus a weak Jet offensive line and quarterback in Zach Wilson. So that's a few defense DST units I look to add here in Week 8 of the fantasy football season.